President Biden was in Virginia Beach yesterday giving a speech for a healthcare event. He opened by sharing his experience receiving care for 2 life-threatening brain aneurysms at Walter Reed Medical Center in 1988, shouting out one nurse who is particularly angelic. Let's take a look.
And I had a nurse named Pearl Nelson, military. She'd come in and do things that I don't think you learn in medical school, nursing school. She'd whisper in my ear. I couldn't understand her, but she'd whisper, she'd lean down. She'd actually breathe on me to make sure that there was a connection, a human connection. She even went home and brought back her pillow from her own bed because she knew the one I had, the one comfortable. But I'm not joking.
How did Mrs. Biden feel about all that?
Look, maybe you've missed this Joe Biden. Maybe it's been so many years since the famous anecdote about how he was a lifeguard at a black swimming pool when he was in his youth, and all the black kids loved to pet his blonde leg hairs. Maybe it's been too long for you since you've heard him do something cringe like eulogize segregationist Strom Thurmond. Maybe you were missing one of these Bidenisms when he shouts at someone who's talking to him at a town hall at a factory and says, "Listen, fat," and challenges them to do push-ups. If that's you, he's back with this anecdote, which, look, obviously, ultimately, it's not a big deal in the grand scheme of things. We're ratcheting up for World War III and all of the rest. But it does raise the question whether or not Joe Biden's eccentricity is going to be a liability for him on the campaign trail, especially now that he is going to be 4 years older. Does this continue to underscore the argument that many have made that he might not be up to the task?
Well, speaking of people making that argument, we wanted to play a little bit more of Bill Maher talking about this very issue with Jake Tapper on CNN. Let's watch.
82.
Yes, absolutely. Well, first of all, I think that's a big red herring that his age is such a factor. You don't need to be young or spry to be president. Yes, it's very helpful to run for president. You need to be energetic and look sharp at a debate. He could do the job of president perfectly fine, and I think he's done the job perfectly fine. Do I love everything he's done? Absolutely not. But, you know, he's president. That goes with the territory. But generally, he's restored normality. He's got some things passed that nobody thought he could get through, this divided Congress. Got out of Afghanistan. Did he stick the landing on that one? No, but at least he did it. I mean, Ukraine, I think he's done fine. And every other country in the world seems to have gotten this idea about the elderly. They're wise. That's what you need. I don't mind at all that he's 82 or 84 or 86.
So I said earlier that I generally like and appreciate what Bill Maher has to say. I don't quite agree with him here.
Why not?
I think we are excessively governed by the very elderly in a historically unprecedented way. I think the elderly's policy judgments might be different than younger Americans on tech issues, frankly on entitlements as well. I don't like the extent to which some of this, our whole entitlement system is a transfer of wealth to people who already have a lot of it at the end of their age and people who don't. You probably disagree with some of that, but fine enough. And also, like we've seen, like I believe Senator Dianne Feinstein's legislating abilities are compromised via her age. It doesn't have to just be age. John Fetterman, we haven't actually talked about this on the show yet. He checked himself in for depression. It sounds like his recovery is not going all that well or as well as he wants it to. Look, he won the election, so fine. But I think there are very valid questions about whether someone in his position can effectively govern, effectively legislate. Now, fine, you can say that the person we vote in is just a figurehead, and they have, they're a puppet, and the actual team behind them makes all the important decisions, and
George
so then
Santos,
it could be.
Sometimes they're young.
What?
There's a George Santos problem. Sometimes they're young, but they're just not at all who they represented themselves to be.
Fine. So. But I mean, then you can go too far with that, or that maybe we should go too far with it. Then nothing matters. It literally doesn't matter what you're just voting for a slate of ideas and hoping the team behind that person is going to implement them.
It's not that nothing matters. I think it's perfectly fair to be critical not of Joe Biden's age, because again, whereas Joe Biden and definitely Dianne Feinstein seem to have changed as they've gotten older.
As older people do.
Yeah, and I think frankly, Biden is so much, it's not even almost fair to lump him in with Feinstein.
Yeah.
But, you know, Biden has been in the national stage for decades. We know what he looked like in a debate in 2008 versus the debate in 2020. Like we saw it, we were there. And so whether or not you think that he still has enough going on that he can still legislate, I think Bill Maher is probably right about that. When I looked at his State of the Union performance and saw how he was able to flip the boos of Republicans, when he claimed that some Republicans wanted to cut Social Security and they booed, he said, okay, great, now we have consensus that we're not going to cut Social Security. That was good politics. And to the extent that Bill Maher is saying we need to have respect for experience and wisdom of potentially older people, that's the kind of wisdom and experience that I think is going to really benefit the Democrats if they run Biden again. The question is, are there younger people who also have that political skill, which again is not necessarily correlated with age? And two, are those other things that Bill Maher mentioned, how difficult it is in terms of stamina to actually run for office, going to hurt Biden in the long run? In 2020, he had the excuse of the pandemic that he could stay in the proverbial or maybe literal basement. Is it going to look different if he's running against younger, more able, agile people, both in the primary and the potential primary battle or in a general election? And is it going to look different if he's going up against someone like Donald Trump, who is also older?
Or if he's up against someone like Governor DeSantis, who is much younger. DeSantis is unbelievably young.
He is younger, but also, you know, who? This is so ridiculous to have to talk in these terms, but who cuts the more striking figure? Who actually does stand at the podium and looks? You know, there's Americans have these biases for height, for hair having in our leaders, all these other things that come into play.
Maybe
and
Biden will be
good.
up against Nikki Haley, who's so far past her prime. It's just a shriveled thing that...
They're basically equivalent in terms of age and past priminess for their respective genders.
No, it's a good point, and one that probably gets forgotten too often, that how much the situation of the pandemic played to Biden's strength, or rather covered up for his weaknesses or his lack of energy as an older man, in that so much of traditional campaigning was shut down. There was no convention. The conventions took place virtually. That really covered for probably some deficiencies he would have had in the speech giving and the arguing and the debating. And that's not going to be the case this time around. And he's going to be 4 years older.
Yes. And
I think one can make a really compelling argument that he was exactly the right candidate to capitalize on the reality of the pandemic, because he does. Yeah. Again, I try to, even though I don't agree with his policies, I try to concede where he has strengths, so that you can credibly accept when I say I think this is a weakness he has. I think one of his strengths is that he does come across as very empathetic, and at a time where we were all miserable and people were dying and people were scared, yes. he has a kind of grandfatherly yes. reassurance to him, and he has suffered tragedy in his life. Yes. It's very authentic when he talks about it. And then, he didn't have to campaign as energetically as you would in any other election cycle because of the pandemic.
And even
that
kind of
him.
Cringe, weird stories like this, I think there's a part of the public that finds them to be endearing too, and authentic. In the same way that Trump will say some wild stuff, but at the end of the day, it feels like Trump says what Trump wants to say. And there's a kind of, even if he's clearly lying, he's saying the lie that he chose. It's his own lie. And there's something that I think is reassuring about that in the same way with Joe Biden. Joe Biden loves to say, they don't want me to say this, but, and then say some crazy thing about how many biracial couples are in TV ads or whatever.
What?
He brings this up constantly. They want me to stop talking about this, but have you seen how many biracial people are in TV ads? The world is going to be great because we're all going to biracial our way out of racial strife. It's a weird take. But before we close this conversation on the gerontocracy, I should add that age is nothing but a number, and you got to look at what people are actually doing and how they're performing. Because I know I have my biases. There's this famous clip of Bernie Sanders, who at his big age is still racing through the halls. You know, he had a record track score as a high school from his Brooklyn high school.
I know he was a track and basketball kid. I
maybe
think.
Even sub 4 miles. Sub 5 mile like Olympics
record.
Okay, sub 5 was 4. Yeah, it was 4 something mile score, and he says he attributes that to how quickly he rebounded from his heart attack during the campaign and.
I saw him running down the street once when I lived on Capitol Hill.
Did you?
Yeah.
First-hand knowledge here, guys. Age ain't nothing but a number.
All right. Well, I hope to be running down the corridors at that. He's probably faster than I am right now at his age. So, more Rising after this. Stay with us.